Welcome back. You're watching World Talks, and I'm your host, Klaudia Czerwińska. Pro-EU demonstrations that have rocked Georgia for more than 2 weeks could escalate as the ruling Georgian Dream Party prepares to appoint its loyalist candidate on Saturday, further endangering the country's chances of joining the European Union. With me now to discuss the potential future scenarios for Georgia is Grigol Julukhidze, Associate Professor at the Caucasus University. Thank you for joining me here in the studio.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So, as I mentioned before, on Saturday, the Georgian Dream is planning to strengthen its grip on power by appointing a former footballer as a successor to the pro-Western, pro-European President Salome Zurabishvili, who has refused to step down. I had an opportunity to speak to her only but a few weeks ago, and she said that she is not interested because she has to be there to serve the people. Do you think that she could actually initiate the steps towards potential new elections? What's your opinion on this?
The only issue that might change the idea of the Georgian Dream to change its actions and political course is a force, and sometimes sharp one. What I mean, mass demonstrations, when they see that the people come out to the streets in order to express their dissatisfaction and organize mass protest against the current situation. This is the language they understand. Unfortunately, the role of Salome Zurabishvili and other opposition politicians is quite limited because of their, let's say, frankly and directly, quite reduced popularity index, because over the past few years, their actions caused a huge dissatisfaction among Georgians. But right now, I completely agree with you. Salome Zurabishvili represents the only bridge to the West, because she is the only politician who is able to call President of France, President of Poland, Chancellor of Germany, and of course it plays a very important role right now.
How do you think the government is going to react if Ms. Zurabishvili is not going to step down and she's going to try and be that bridge in between the West and Georgia?
I wish I could know, because the actions of the Georgian Dream are beyond the logics from any point of view. But I think that the Georgian Dream is still able to furtherly escalate the situation, because they have resources in this regard. But of course, these resources are not limitless. They're quite limited, of course, because of the growing internal protest, because of the fear of the real ruler of Georgia, Mr. Bidzina Ivanishvili, that the system will collapse, because we see the initial steps in this direction, and of course the sanctions that will follow. And you perfectly know that the US administration has decided to impose sanctions on 20 Georgian officials responsible for the violence against the peaceful demonstrators.
But do you think that those sanctions actually have the power to change anything within the country? Or maybe the outside grip on Georgia, when it comes, for example, to the influence from Russia, is too great to actually stand in contradiction to those sanctions?
These sanctions have factual and psychological impacts. What I mean? Psychologically, it is a very strong signal to other officials and other government representatives to not follow the example of the sanctioned colleagues, let's say. Because when you are sanctioned by the US Treasury Department, the European Union, or you're sanctioned on the national level by the EU member states, it means that you have limited opportunity to travel, to make business, to send your kids to the Western universities. And we talk about Georgia, it is not Belarus, it is not isolated country. 85%, almost 80%, of Georgians say that they want to become the members of the European Union, and they are directly attached to the West from the point of view of soft power, economics, politics, etc., etc. As for the, let's say, factual aspect of these sanctions, I would say that the signals that are sent from Washington, Brussels, Warsaw, Baltic states, Berlin, Paris, once again demonstrate that that's only beginning. And only very, very strong regimes are able to survive under these consequences.
Is there enough survival power when it comes to Georgia for those sanctions and those growing sanctions not to shake up the Georgian dream?
I think that they don't have such kind of power because Georgia is a very limited economy. Yes, the interdependence on Russia has dynamically grown, but still, the Georgian economy is not directly attached to Russia. And under these circumstances and situation, Moscow is not able to finance another brother in commerce, of course, like Georgia, or let's say, provide with the necessary means to survive from these devastating potential sanctions. And apart from that, let's pay attention to the currency exchange rate. The lari is becoming more and more vulnerable in terms of the external sanctions to dollar, US dollar, euro, and not only.
We are here to discuss the possible scenarios that Georgia might be facing in weeks and months to come. We've heard from some experts who say that there are 4 possible scenarios, and let me just outline them: a compromise scenario, a Belarus scenario, Cold War Poland scenario, or fireworks revolution. Which one do you think is most likely? And
none
why?
of them, in my opinion. We have 3 scenarios from my point of view. The first one is internal disintegration of the Georgian dream, because the growing unrest and the growing dissatisfaction internally already undermines the stability of the government. I remind you that the ambassadors, high-rank officials resign. The second scenario is the scenario in which the Georgian dream manages to win and prevail in this catastrophic scenario, and we won't see Belarus because Belarus was directly attached to Russian economy, and its economy was much stronger than Georgian. And from this point of view, the situation will be devastating for this Eastern European country. And there is third scenario. That's a very pessimistic scenario, and it might be very, very similar to the Euromaidan too.
So, do you think that a Maidan, a similar scenario to Maidan, could actually take place? Because this is something that we've covered here on TVP World, and we spoke to some other of our guests, and I was wondering what your opinion on this is, and would it actually help?
I would say that no one is ready for the Maidan scenario, from opposition, from including the government, because we don't see prepared groups that would be ready for the confrontation with the police. The Georgian police is not as effective as was Berkrut during the Yanukovych era. But, you know, when such kind of force, brutal force is used and applied against the peaceful demonstrators, students, the youngsters, fatalities may occur. And then taking into consideration the character of Georgians, quite unpredictable people who react to emotionally issues, frankly speaking, I have no idea what might happen. And one of scenarios in this situation would be dramatic and very, very drastic response from the ordinary Georgians, even from those ones who voted for the Georgian dream, because Georgians react to the violence severely.
Which takes me to my next question. What is the situation of those people who are protesting there in Tbilisi, but also in other parts of Georgia? Because I was wondering if the freedom of speech is endangered, because we've heard about 400 people who are detained. We've heard about journalists who were arrested. We heard of the letter that was issued by journalist representatives in Georgia to the West. Are we to expect human rights violations? What's the situation there?
Catastrophic, because the people are kidnapped from the streets directly by the police. They're attacked by the so-called Titushkis, and the government-controlled radical groups, and no one reacts. For example, a student of mine was beaten by several individuals, but the police has not showed up yet. We have also quite ridiculous, tragically ridiculous situation as well. For example, another student girl, 19 years old girl, right now is under the potential sentence because of the alleged allegations that she has beaten up 7 policemen. So it's a very, very tragical and very dramatic situation. Unfortunately, I do not see any perspective, any positive and any optimistic perspective from this point of view, because unless the regime exists, these police forces will follow any kind of instruction issued by the most loyal people to Mr. Bidzina.
You mentioned only a second ago that there is a possibility that Georgians will go against Georgians. So I wanted to know your opinion on how is the society divided between different political camps? Is there a lot of polarization going on in Georgia right now?
Yes, the polarization rate is high, and the state propaganda works in this direction very effectively. And I see a lot of similarities in terms of modus operandi between Russian and Georgian model. And if you are monitoring the narratives disseminated by the Russian propaganda, they are very similar to the narratives disseminated by the pro-government channels. And the aim of this operation, and psychological operation as well, is to increase the quality and rate of the polarization between the society. But I still remain quite optimistic, because Georgians made a lot of conclusions after 90s, when there was a civil war. And hopefully, luckily, I am very optimistic about the future scenario in this direction. There won't be any civil confrontation between ordinary people. The story is between the regime and the vast majority of Georgians.
And for how long do you think those protests could potentially last? I mean, we're looking into the 3rd week of demonstrations. We have our very own Don Arleth on the ground, who will be reporting more on what is happening. But how much longer do you think people will be able to stand against?
Well, first of all, I'd like to use this occasion and thank TVP World for sending the crew, because it is very important, your presence there. As for the potential continuation of the demonstrations, it is very difficult to predict something, because everything is being changed on a daily basis. And if we take into consideration the fact that the government is quite vulnerable, it is not as strong as it was in Russia. It is in Belarus, but of course it does not mean that we have to underestimate their power. It is very difficult what will be the further actions. Also, a lot of things depend on the decisions of the West, how they will react. Sending European parliamentarians to Rustaveli Avenue is one thing, but tangible actions that might reduce this tension and send clear messages to the Georgian government is another issue.
Thank you so much. Grigol Julukhidze, Associate Professor at the Caucasus University. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
And so this would be all for now here on World Talks, but please do stay tuned here on TVP World, because we will be back in just a moment with more news and features.